Hello, everyone, and welcome to our series of webinars being held during this month of August. I am Juliana Perlov. I work for MSD as the International CMC Latin America lead, and I am also a member of the IFPMA Task Force Group for the ICH M4Q R2 representing Interpharma Brazil. I will serve as a moderator in today's session. This is the second session of the Latin America ICH webinar series on advancing global health through harmonization, the Latin America ICH journey. This webinar is organized in collaboration with IFARMA, IFPMA, AMIF, CAEMI, Interpharma, and Sindusfarma, bringing together regulatory authorities, pharma industry representatives, and experts to explore the progress of Latin America in international harmonization through ICH participation. Today, we will navigate through the CTD guideline on quality, the M4Q, that is under review, exploring the main updates and changes and the respective impact to our region. I wanted to thank you all for joining us and for being part of this important regional and international discussion, which is highly relevant for the present and future of health regulation. Before we begin, I would like to share a few instructions. The presentation will be made in Portuguese, and you can select your preferred language by going to the bottom of your screen and clicking in the interpretation box with a globe icon. This will open the list of available languages, English, Portuguese, Spanish, and you can select the language that is most convenient for you. For the best audio quality, we recommend selecting the mute original audio option if you choose to listen in a language other than the one being used by the speaker. In case you may have any questions about the topic being presented today, please feel free to submit it through Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We will address them during this webinar, or it will be published after the event to ensure all questions are responded. The presentation and recordings will be shared via email using the address you provided when joining this session. I will now switch to Portuguese, and thank you. Bem-vindo a todos nesse importante webinar como parte da série de webinars de ICH na América Latina. Hoje iremos navegar pelo guia CTD, porção da qualidade.
Welcome everyone to this webinar. We're going to navigate the guideline that is being issued, addressing the main changes for our region. In this section, we will have different perspectives and insights on the proposals for update of this guideline, whose purpose is to improve the life cycle of products. This guide is currently under public consultation, and it's an opportunity to have the perspectives of both regulatory entities and the industry, bringing in relevant information about the impacts and barriers for implementation. We have our agenda here: Ellen Nogueira, representative of Anvisa, and Sheila, representative of IPMA through Interpharma. Both of them work as WG specialists for ICH, and they're going to bring us a presentation about the update of the guideline and the implications for Latin America through the perspectives of the regulatory authority and the industry. And then we're going to have a discussion panel with questions and answers, and a panel that will discuss the implementation strategy, the necessary training and opportunities for harmonization. This panel will include Sheila, Helen, and Rafael, who is the general manager of Anvisa in medication registration or drug registration. Then we will proceed with the main takeaways of the session and for everyone to commit to the public use of the guide. And so I will begin my presentation. I will begin by introducing Sheila. Sheila is Executive Director of Regulatory Area at AstraZeneca Brazil, with experience in grants, development of regulatory strategies. Since 2019, she has acted as coordinator of the working group at Interpharma. In 2021, in an Interpharma and IFPMA partnership, she's representing IFPMA in the working group for EWG and ICH for the guidelines and the M4Q. She's also a healthcare specialist since 2014. She's a pharmacist with a specialization on pharmacy regulation and an MBA in analytics. She's also a representative of EWG. So Sheila, Ellen, congratulations on your work for the preparation of this guide. And surely today we're going to have very rich discussions. And now you have the floor. Thank you, Juliana, for the introduction. I'm going to share my slides now. Please let me know if you can see my slides. Okay, very good. Good afternoon. I'm going to continue with my presentation in Portuguese. As Juliana already told you, if you need translation, please use the available interpretation tools. I want to share with you the review of the M4Q guideline for those of us who are part of the EWG and have accompanied the whole session. These slides that we will use as the basis for our presentation are on the ICH website, and they were prepared by EWG to better support the guideline drafting process. The purpose of these slides is to explain some contents and provide details on the reason for the M4Q guideline to exist. As you know, M4Q R2 was signed off for public consultation this year. ICH countries are mobilizing this document for public consultation, which includes two specific guidelines. For instance, in Brazil, we already have an open consultation through Anvisa. We now will present an overview about the benefits and objectives, the design of M4Q, a comparison between R2 and R1, what has changed, what are some of the anticipated changes, and all of this in relation with the public consultation and all the different stakeholders and how the regulators can provide their input for ICH. So M4QR1, known as CTD, sets out the format on how information should be presented to the regulators, be it in terms of safety, efficacy, and quality. We can look at this chart on the M4QR1. We have Module 1 with the administrative functions. We have Module 2, which addresses efficacy and quality, and Module 3 that also presents information related to both clinical and non-clinical qualities. This document is from 2002. So the first version of M4Q is coming from 2002. The document has been in use for around 20 years, and it's transitioned very well. And we have a document that seeks to standardize the format on how information must be delivered in terms of efficacy, quality, and safety. So, stemming from this common document, each country had a specific document with all the information, but each of them with specific templates for each country. So this transition that ICH implemented was very important back then. Since 2002 to the present, many things have changed in terms of the technologies that are involved with these products, as well as the understanding of quality, which has also evolved. So this M4QR2 is considered as a first step for a great change that needs to occur quickly. And it has to do with the digital transformation and regulatory issues that has been going through a lot of changes. So M4QR2 is coming in to set the foundations for the future, structuring how the information can be presented in the CTD modules so that the information is useful and usable with new technologies and tools that surely will emerge for regulatory issues. So this step one, it starts with M4QR2, and step two has a discussion about SPQS, which has to do with structured data quality. And it has the M16 that was approved in the recent Madrid meeting, and this will be a working group that will be working with the concepts of structured submission. So it's not the M4Q that is doing that, but it's a new group that we are creating that will implement the proposals of the M4Q right now. What are the objectives and the benefits? So when in 2020, we started with a discussion on M4Q. So we had to survey what the issues were that need to be resolved, because a review of M4Q should be operational right now. And the conditions were assigned to four main pillars. So M4 is no longer related to all the drugs available in the market and the ones that are coming. Let us remember that many of the things that we have in the present didn't exist back in 2002. So one of the points for revision of these guides is thinking about what this pharmaceutical categories or innovative products could be. Another important point about the revision of the M4Q guide is to guarantee there should be a regulatory foundation. The M4Q needs to be very clear about the information throughout the life cycle of the product. And another thing that was considered an opportunity for M4Q review is to think how it would be possible to submit some of these forms in a much better format that is easily analyzable. In addition, since 2002, many other quality guidelines have emerged from ICH. We have QA 12, 13 other quality guidelines that have surely been published since 2002. And now that despite that we already had some specific guidelines, they were not clearly provided for within M4Q. So one of the main reasons for the review or the revision was to ensure that new quality concepts were adequately rolled out within the M4Q. And in terms of the general control strategy proposed, there are two concepts that are not that are new, that are not available in the quality guidelines in force, and that is why they were brought into this second revision, so that they will now become the sign for this regulatory review. And so it compiles such important information. And so another important change is to turn Module 2 on quality, the major source of regulatory review, making this review increasingly effective, both in terms of the regulatory review as well as evaluation by the regulator. And because Module 2 will, as I will explain later on, is being underused. A lot has been discussed about what to do and how to turn this Module 2 into a section that will bring in a regulatory part, and what are the expected benefits from the industry side. For better clarity of these regulatory perspectives, the point is that all quality guidelines are going through EWG revision or review, and how can we optimize that? That is an expectation from the industry, that if the R2 brings in, whether R2 brings in the clarity, and how can we see this M4QR2 in terms of the product?
And the ICH M4Q also seeks to meet that expectation of the industry. On the other hand, one of the great expectations of regulators is for this effort to also drive regulation that is to be improved and be more efficient. And before the current risks, we know that this work can be much more complex with its specificities, and so risk-based assessments are very important, and that will also drive this new portfolio and provide these global tools. The expected benefit is, of course, once the industry and regulators have a more efficient way of working and also provides much more agility, well, at the end of the day, the most benefited will be patients, as they will have accelerated access to new drugs. At the same time, this will also reduce the risk of short supply of drugs. Now I'll talk about the M4Q design. I'll try to parallelly confirm, or rather compare, Module 2 and Module 3. Today, as I already said before, the Module 2 is quite underused to the extent of what kind of quality information it entails. Now, Module 3 is a greater source of quality information for regulatory purposes. And that is why results, as well as proposals, rationals, and reports are presented in this Module 3. Now, in Module 2, Module 2 is the baseline for analysis or assessment. Module 2 will be presented with several proposals, and the structure under which these proposals are being presented is to the extent that Module 3 would provide the data that are currently being discussed in Module 2. So not necessarily regulatory authorities will need Module 3, as long as, of course, the assessments on Module 2 are quite updated. So this general vision is quite comprehensive, and what we foresee is for this data quality to be presented in Module 2, as well as tools of the life cycle. These will also be presented in Module 2. However, I won't deep dive into this right now because we have further information about changes in these two modules. So M4Q will enable much more efficient, effective, and patient-centric and globally harmonized submissions, as well as assessment and life cycle management, and to the possible extent, minimizing redundancies. M4Q will also enable various types of submission and product modalities, and it sets the base as well for future implementation of structured product quality submissions, which is part of the routinary work of regulatory authorities. This is a very general diagram to illustrate what we will now deep dive in. And I'll just like to make a note. I will mention some terms in English because these terms have been worked in the public consultation, in the draft of the public consultation of the M4Q. So there's no exact translation of these terms to Portuguese to date. That is why we will use the same English terms in Portuguese. So, for example, at the center of the diagram, the core quality information. I will explain further on about each of the elements, but basically this core quality information is at the center. The next circle surrounding it is the development summary and justifications. And in Module 3, overall development and overall control strategy are also included. So this outer circle refers to Module 2. So as you can see, Module 2 has these three main elements. And Module 3 entails body of data where we will find additional in-depth information to support the submission, such as reports and other documents. So, the Module 2 structure overview, and also the one of Module 3, looks a bit like this. Module 2 entails general information, overall development, and overall control strategy, core quality information, or CQI by its acronym in English, development summary and justification, DSJ, and a new segment of product lifecycle management. So this is a new concept that is part of R2, and an optional element, which is called product quality benefit risk, and it will be applied in some specific situations. In Module 3, which, as I said, entails the body of data. As I said before, these slides are publicly available. You can consult them if you ever need to, or if you would like to deep dive a bit into these explanations. I'm not reading right now the full description of it because there are other slides that can perhaps clarify this information in the later stages of the session. So I will now explain how these sections work together. Module 2, as I said before, is the basis for review. So core quality information, development, summary justifications, and overall development and overall control strategy. These three layers, or these three outer circles, are the information that need to be presented with a sufficient level of detail so that based on this information, the regulator can make a decision for regulatory purposes. Of course, once the company provides detailed information, there's always the possibility to refer to Module 3 so that more specific information is analyzed or for data to be confirmed. At a conceptual level, Module 2 should present this information sufficiently. So I think we should understand the division of Module 2 and Module 3 under two perspectives. The initial marketing authorization. So this general understanding should facilitate an overall understanding and support an efficient assessment, and it should describe how the product and the manufacturing process were developed, including science and risk-based justifications. And this information should be considered necessary to support a science and risk-based regulatory assessment. In relation to the repository, well, this one should compile more detailed descriptions of methods, documents, and other assessment-relevant quality information that is, of course, mentioned in Module 2. However, in Module 3, it's raw data, which is or should be presented. Basically, Module 2 serves as a more regulatory-driven type of information. In terms of function during life cycle management, Module 2 will be quite important for life cycle management because the core of the product is here. Module 2 is basically the proposed and registered conditions. So, the CQI should entail or should be rather maintained. The content of it should be maintained throughout the product life cycle and the registered information. So Module 2 for life cycle management will be quite important. And the CQI is, conceptually speaking, what will be subject after registration. While Module 3 content is supported and it may or not be updated in a post-approval change. It will depend on the level of approval. So Module 3 is content that might not necessarily need to be updated. And now I'll hand the floor to my colleague,
Obrigada,
Ellen.
Sheila. Então, vou retomar como primeiro
Thank you,
queria
Sheila.
agradecer, né, a
So,
oportunidade da gente
well,
fazer
first
essa
of all, thank
apresentação, né,
you
sobre o
for
guia, né,
inviting
esses
me
slides foram preparados, né, como a
to
Sheila
do
falou,
this
pelo
presentation. And as
EWG,
Sheila just
para serem
mentioned,
compartilhados juntos, né, com o
well, all
WhatsApp,
this set
né, com
of
a minuta
slides
do
will
guia,
be shared
mas
with you
realmente
as well as the
a gente sabe
agenda.
que a apresentação, né, dos slides fica, né, muito mais fácil para o entendimento. Então, eu
But of
vou
course, we
retomar aqui
understand that having
falando,
the
né, como
slides help everyone
Sheila falou,
understand
pouquinho
much more the
mais, né,
content. So
detalhando
as
sobre essas
Shayla
sessões
mentioned, we
do
will
novo dessa nova revisão, né, da revisão 2. Primeiro cabe
deep dive a bit
destacar, né,
into
se
this
vocês olharem,
second
a
revision, I would just like to
codificação, ela
highlight
bem diferente, né, da versão atual, né, da R1,
the
e
current
justamente para não
version
ter
is a
uma
bit different from the
sobreposição, né? Então,
previous
uma vez
one.
que a gente fala
And
R1, a
so
gente está falando de algumas sessões da
once we talk,
SOP,
or whenever we
e
talk
já
about R1,
nessa revisão 2, a gente tem toda uma codificação diferente, exatamente para não ter,
we
a
have different
gente
topics
saber que
because
a
in
gente
the
está
R2 we
falando
have
dessa
a
nova
different
revisão. Então, queria primeiro fazer
set of
esse esclarecimento. Então,
specifications. So I
agora,
just wanted to
partindo para as
highlight how
sessões
R1 is
específicas
different
do
to
módulo
R2.
2, né, e do módulo 3, né, a gente vai falar
Now,
também.
for
No que
Module
diz
2 and
respeito ao
Module
módulo
3,
2, a primeira sessão é a sessão de General Information, né, informação geral, e ela nada mais é do que corresponde, né, à sessão de introdução hoje do R1, com pequenas alterações, né, então inclui
and it
a
has
questão
some differences between
do nome do
R1
princípio ativo, né,
and
que
R2.
o nome
For example, the
internacional,
names of
forma
the active
farmacêutica, as
agents,
concentrações, rota de administração, o material de embalagem,
as well as
produtos
pharmaceutical,
médicos, se houver, e também a parte de dose diária máxima, né? Então,
registration,
esse
and
realmente
different
assim,
medical
são
products, as
informações
well
gerais
as
do
routes,
produto que,
packaging,
de
medical
fato,
devices, and maximum daily
são
dose. Those are
bem
basically the
similares, né, ao que a gente tem no R1. Próximo
general
slide, por favor.
information about the product,
Já a
and they're
seção
actually quite
232, ela se refere ao Overall
similar.
Development
In
Strategy
session
e o Overall
232, we
Control
see
Strategy.
how
Então, falando um
overall
pouquinho do
development
Overall Development
strategy
Strategy, ele fornece esse
and
resumo
overall control strategy
conciso do
are
Nacional do
both
Desenvolvimento,
entailed.
destacando todas aquelas decisões chaves para aquela qualidade pretendida, né? Então, nessa sessão,
And this
a
basically
gente tem
details
a
all the key
informação do
points
QTP, né, que é o
in
Quality
reference
Product
to
Profile,
quality.
e você vai exatamente fazer nessa primeira subseção, você vai informar um pouquinho qual é a
And
estratégia global de desenvolvimento.
this is the one that we include
Nessa
in this
sessão
first
também temos o
subsession.
Overall Control Strategy, e como a Sheila
In
falou,
this
a
first session, we also
a
include
ideia
the
dessa
overall control
versão
strategy, as
R2,
my colleague Shayla previously
ela não
mentioned.
é
And this
alterar
is
os
not a new
produtos, né? Já
concept.
que o M4Q, né, de qualidade, ele se
We
trata, ele
haven't
trata
sought to
realmente do
alter the
conteúdo,
content because this one
formato e
is covered in
organização. Então, o
ICH
conteúdo
Q10
realmente ele
and
vai
other
para o
guidelines, and
que
it's really
estão nos
about
outros guias, né?
an
Então, o
organization.
Overall
So
Control Strategy, ele não é um
content
conceito novo,
is
ele
actually
está
the same
coberto no
to other
CRR Q10 e
guidelines.
outros
So
guias,
overall control
e a
strategy
gente
is
vai, né,
not
por
a new
meio dessa
concept. It is
sessão,
already
conhecer um local
included in
dentro do
other
CPD
guidelines.
para apresentar
And in this
essa
session,
estrutura, né, global para
we will
assegurar realmente a qualidade do produto, né? Ao invés de ter uma
provide a
comparação só
placeholder
dos
within the
controles
CTD to
individuais,
present
sem
a
considerar
comprehensive framework for
a
ensuring
seu
overall
significado, né, a
product quality,
significância para assegurar a qualidade. Então, nesse desenho que a gente tem aí, então, tudo
rather than
parte
being a
do
simple compilation of individual
QTPP,
controls
né, o
without
Quality Product
consideration of their
Profile, e
significance in
todos
assuring
aqueles
quality. So
controles,
this is part
parâmetros
of
críticos,
the
atributos críticos dos materiais para você atingir essa qualidade. Então, essa sessão é uma sessão
guideline,
nova,
and
né,
it
comparada
also
com
includes all the
o R1,
critical
e a
material
gente tem que
attributes so that we
pode, né,
can
dar,
reach
entra
that
naquelas
quality.
sessões que
In
realmente
this
vão dar a
extent,
visão
this is a
geral,
different
né, do
session.
produto para o avaliador.
And
Próximo slide,
well, we
por
can
favor.
enter into sessions that can give us
A
much
próxima
more of a
sessão é uma
general
sessão bem
overview of the
importante,
product
né,
for
como
regulatory purposes.
a Sheila falou, né, o Core Quality
The next
Information,
session
né,
is quite an
CQI,
important one,
ele
as
fornece, né, essa
Shayla
avaliação
already
baseada em risco, né, na
mentioned.
ciência, para
Core quality
permitir, né,
information, or
realmente
CQI,
registro e
supports a
facilitar o
science and
desenvolvimento. Então,
risk-based regulatory
essa sessão, ela
assessment
deve incluir toda a
to
informação sujeita
enable
ao ciclo de vida, né, de
marketing
acordo com os
authorization and
requisitos
facilitate lifecycle
registros
management.
da
This
autoridade
section
para assegurar a
should
qualidade
include
do produto.
all information
O que é importante é
subject
que,
to
assim,
life
essa
cycle
sessão ela
management
vai
per regional
conter
post-approval
aquilo que a gente
change
chama de
requirements to
conteúdo
ensure
aprovado.
product quality. It
Então,
is important to highlight that
se
this
houver
session
uma
will
alteração na
include what
revisão
we
aprovada,
call
isso vai ensejar, né, um pós-registro. Então, por isso que o
approved
solicitante deve
stage,
manter
and that
esse CQI,
these should
né, o
maintain in the
CQI, ao
CQIs
longo
throughout
do
the
ciclo
product
de
life
vida
cycle
para assegurar, né, que a informação da qualidade do produto se mantém atual.
to
Né?
ensure
Então,
that product
como a gente
quality
falou, né, realmente esse é o
information
core realmente
remains
da
current,
qualidade do
remains
produto, né?
updated.
Então, a gente,
So
tudo aquilo que ensejar um
this
pós-registro, ele vai
is
estar nessa sessão.
a
Quando,
key part for
né,
the
como
product
a
life
Sheila também
cycle.
comentou, como a gente também nós estamos também
And
trabalhando,
as
né, nos outros guias,
Shayla already
hoje, né,
mentioned,
quando
we
a
are
gente
currently
fala do
working in
ICHQ-12,
other
se você
guidelines.
tiver,
Today, when we're
se a
talking
empresa, né,
about
utilizar, né, e adotar o Established Conditions, essas atividades de ciclo de vida
Q12,
também
And when the established conditions per Q12 are approved, lifecycle activities should follow the approved PLCM, and they will be included in another session, which is the session that Sheila already mentioned, session 2352, which I will further mention. However, we must also underpin that even though the company can use these identifications or FSCs, this should not result in a reduction of information submitted in the marketing authorization application, because this CQI will have that same information so that we can understand the characteristics of the product. Therefore, this section is very important for this format. Now I'd like to talk about section 234, development summary and justification. This one should describe how the drug substance and product, their components,
the product, the components, and whether the manufacturing process,
including the main choices made throughout the development,
and with all the reviews in the development and all the rationale for the
justifications should be discussed in
the
discussion of the
technique,
proposed commercial process and control strategies, as well as the justification
and
as
other justifications of
Q12
and
reporting
other
categories
reporting
when
categories
ICH Q12
whenever
is applied, as
Q12
previously
is applied.
mentioned, as this is content that
It is a
presenting
content that
justifications,
presents
it
a
must be backed.
rationale and the justifications. It is a
However,
supporting document, but
this
this
must be
can serve
updated
to be
whenever a
updated
post-approval
after the registration.
adjustment is to be made. For example, a new registration
section is
for someone
possibly
that
a new
has already
section
read the
that
guideline
maybe
and has
some of you
reviewed this
have
information.
already reviewed.
Well, in that
This is
case,
section
the section
2.3.4
234 IN should
it
include
some
justifications
topics such as a discussion with
when a
different
holistic discussion
parties,
across several parts of the dossier's advantages. For example,
and
this is the case for
this is advantageous
extractables,
because we have
leachables,
different
adventitious agents,
agents,
products
we
without a defined
have
and or isolated drug substance that
different
can see similarity or sameness with a reference product.
drug
Understanding
substances,
that
and
we perhaps may have
the
more
point is
complex
that we
products or
have
that don't have such a
increasingly
linear
complex
differentiation
products that
with
don't
an active
necessarily follow
agent.
this
So this
linear
section
division of things
has this objective
with
to
the
offer this
adventitious
possibility so that
agents and
justifications and data
drug
can be included in a
substance.
more in more of a
This is
holistic
different
way.
from what we had
And
in
that is where
R1,
we need to also choose within
where we
the
had to select
finished product.
or choose between the
And
products
so
that
this
were
section basically
finished
enables
already.
that.
And of course, the whole development summary
And
justification
finally, this session, development
seeks to
summary and
support the
justification,
process and
is
the
to enable
data
backing
is
documents,
a
and it
source
would
that
be
would be
included in Module 3.
contained within the Module 3.
This section
This
is the section that Sheila also
section is also
mentioned,
the
which is
product life
section
cycle
235, product
management,
life
as
cycle
Sheila
management.
mentioned.
This one should include
And
a change summary and
the
justification for
idea
post-approval
is
change submissions.
whenever a protocol or
For
document is
example, when
presented for
protocol for the
post-registration
product is to be presented, this will be a specific
categorization,
section
it should also
where this can be
set
included.
out the situation in the post-registry
This
stage, and the point
not
of
to
this
just
was
focus
not
on
only
the
to focus on this on the
approval, but also in the
registration, but also in the
post-approval. There's a subsection
post-registration
within this one which will also
stages.
enable a summary of the
And
proposed change and
this will include a
background.
summary
This would be a
of the
summary
changes and
of
updates,
the
including the
basically all the history
and all the background,
and all the
template
formats
of the
and templates
sections that are
reviewed
included in this
in this updating and
change that is
post-approval.
in the post-registration stage.
Also, the justification for the proposed update
And the
may be provided
justification
here
for
or
the
by
updates that are
cross-referencing
proposed,
to
which can
updated
be provided
sections.
here or through the cross-referencing to other sections, such as 2.3.4, as well as 2.3.3 and 3.2.
May also use this section may also be used to capture use of ICH Q12 tools as applicable
new version,
and regulatory commitments.
Second revision
ICH Q12 has two different stages
two sides
to basically enable
to facilitate both registration and post-registration stages. Another section that is quite important also, and it's new in terms of this revision, is a product quality benefit risk, PQBR, where applicants or sponsors can contextualize quality risks in relation to patient risks, so that there can be some benefits in relation to accelerated development pathways. Quality risks are currently being assessed by the authorities, but we will include this new section allowing the applicant to present the information showing why the informations exceed the risk. It is also related to another section, the 2.5 clinical overview section, and it's discussing the notion of the global risk. So we have included this subsection to allow the applicants to discuss the quality versus the risk versus benefit ratio, and how the benefits far exceed the risks for patients, and also to assess the impact of product efficacy. As we are talking about risk-benefit ratio, this is not part of the EWG scope to dictate how the section is to be used. We know the authorities have more concrete data, but some authorities do not. So in the end, we will be trying to include some of these other cases. We know about some of these accelerated pathways, and there could be some cases where this section could be used. And here I want to finish with Module 3. And the repository and detailed methods and information that support Module 2. Also, information in Module 3 is supportive information and may be amended for post-registration updates. There are some things that changed in the R2. This new version introduced specific information for materials or components. When we look at R1, this new format includes several different subsections, such as substances, but we also have some intermediate substances. We have excipients, and all the structure of this new format will be quite modular, and this will allow to include the local information for us to better identify and as I told you before, the update is not on content, but rather on site or place to ensure the insertion of certain components of a substance in a broader manner.
o que é, né, eu vou ler em inglês, é o Package Medicinal Product
under this new version, and I will read in
né?
English,
então,
we
esse
have
PM, eles seriam produtos que se você tem um kit, então só
the
dando um
PN,
exemplo,
which is a
você tem
product.
uma solução que acompanha uma seringa, né? Para ser então aquele kit,
If,
é o que
for
a gente
instance,
chama
you
de
have
medicinal product,
a solution to be injected with a
também você tem o pharmaceutical
syringe.
product after transformation. Então seria o produto farmacêutico após
This is what we would call a packaged
traduzir,
medicinal
mas como
product,
a
and we
Sheila
also
falou,
have
a gente, né,
pharmaceutical
como não foram
product
definidos ainda
after
como traduzir
transformation.
em português, então a ideia é a gente manter, né, os termos
So,
em inglês
as the
por
terms in
enquanto, até que a
Portuguese
gente
have not been
define,
defined
mas
yet,
assim,
the
só
idea is to
explicando, esse
maintain
caso
the
transformation,
English
ele é um
terminology
termo que
until we
veio da
can better
norma
define
ISO,
that.
que é um
In this
produto que
case,
sofreu uma alteração
transformation,
após a sua fabricação. Então, seria um exemplo, um pó para solução injetável, então a solução
this is
preparada
a product that
esse
has had
product,
an
né,
alteration
pharmaceutical product
or a
after
change.
transformation. Então agora, né, também
So,
vamos ter algum local para apresentar algumas
this is the
informações
solution of the
referentes
prepared product after
a esse,
transformation, and now we have
a
a
esse
place where we
material,
can present
né?
some information in
Até
relation
vale
to
destacar
these
aqui que
materials.
a gente tem alguns slides no
So I
final
also
adicionais,
want
e aqui
to
você tem alguns hiperlinks.
reinforce
Então, algumas
here
informações adicionais estão lá no final da apresentação, apesar da gente
that we
não
have some
passar por
additional
elas, né?
information,
Mas
and we'll
vocês
have some
têm
links
acesso, né,
that
tanto
will be
aqui,
included
né, por meio do
after
webinar,
the
ou também lá no
presentation.
site do ICH, né?
Even if we're not going to
Essa
go through those
apresentação
slides, you can access them
preparada para
through this
metodologia, a gente só
webinar
fez uma adaptação
or the
com a parte da
ICH website.
cultura do
This
Brasil.
presentation
Próximo slide, por favor. Desculpa, Sheila, antes de você mudar. Esqueci de
has
falar
been
de duas
modified
sessões que também são
slightly for the
importantes,
Brazil
que é o Facilities, que
data. But before
essa sessão a gente tanto
handing
vai
the floor, I forgot
englobar a
to
questão
talk
do
about
nome
two
do
important
fabricante
sections.
do
One
item
is
ou do produto
facilities,
acabado, e também, né, no módulo 3, ele já
where
fica
we
realmente
will
uma sessão
be
que é
dealing with
bastante
finished
regional, né? Então,
products, and module 3
que aí
is
seria,
also
dependendo,
very
né, dependendo da autoridade, ela
regional
pode ser
section
ou certificado de boas práticas,
or
ou
regional
pode
level
ser
section,
apresentação de dados, né? Então, por exemplo,
and it would
FDA,
depend on
que
the
faz, a
authority. It could
FDA, que
be
faz
through
pode
good
fazer
practices,
uma inspeção
certification,
pré-registro, então,
or
né? Então,
presenting
esse item de facilities, ele é uma mudança, né, em relação
pre-registration
ao PET 10001,
inspection.
e a outra seção é a Analytical
So this is
Procedures.
a
Então,
change
assim,
from what we
pensando
had in
naquela estrutura
R1.
modular
And
e a
another
não
section is
redundância, qual que vai ser a
analytical
ideia?
procedures
Nessa sessão,
based
ela
on
vai
the
compilar
modular
todos
structure.
os procedimentos analíticos, validações
This
de
section will
métodos, né, de
compile
procedimentos
all the
analíticos
analytical
relacionados ao
procedures,
estratégia de controle.
validations,
Então, por exemplo, no caso de um produto biológico, em que o mesmo método de
and
clone
list the
é
control
usado para o
strategy. So,
isoprene
for
e para o
instance, in a
produto acabado,
biological,
esse método todo eles vão
where
referenciar
the
a uma
method
seção
is
no
used for
Analytical
the
Procedures.
finished product
Então,
as well as
isso
for the
também, né, a gente entende
substance.
que vai ganhar, porque você não vai precisar
This will be used
repetir
for
aquela
a
informação
single
e sim vai
section,
poder ser
under a single
acusado
section,
identificar
and
essa
I
informação naquele
understand that
método
this is a
específico.
win because
Agora
we
sim,
will not
próximo
have the
slide.
need to verify the information, but you can
Outra
cross-reference
organização
it
que
for the
também foi
specific
bastante
method.
inovadora, né, do ponto de vista do
Another
PN2, é que
thing
agora a
that has
maioria das
been quite
subseções
innovative
de materiais, né,
from the
relacionados a
R2
materiais,
perspective is that
eles
most
seguem essa separação, né,
subsections
que é o
related to materials
DMCS, Description,
continue with
Manufacture,
the
Control
separation
e
or the
Storage.
division
Então, o que é o D, né, o Description? Ele identifica o material,
of
suas
the
características-chave,
DMCS,
o M de
which is a
manufacture, né, que é a
description, manufacture,
produção,
control, and
ele
storage.
realmente detalha, né,
So
o processo produtivo. O C de
it is
control,
about
ele descreve as
detailing all
medidas de
this
controle de qualidade, tais como as
production
especificações. O
process
S
and
de storage,
describing the
ele
quality
fornece a
control
questão da
measures,
estabilidade, informação do material de embalagem, e o prazo de
and
validade
storage
ou
gives
request,
us the
né,
information about the
para aquela
packaging
substância.
and quality
Então,
of the
da
packaging
mesma forma, né, que a gente estava
and
discutindo
other
para
information
você
to determine the
facilitar, né, o
substances.
acesso daquela informação,
So to
esse modelo,
facilitate
ele também vai auxiliar na questão de
access to
você conseguir
information,
identificar, né? Então, ele vai auxiliar não só na avaliação, mas também
this model
né, quando você
will
precisar daquela
also
informação,
help
você
us
conseguir realmente acessar
with
aquela documentação mais fácil. Então,
certain
dando um
specific
exemplo,
information
pode ir para o
because we
próximo,
will
por
be
favor?
able to access the documentation
Obrigada, Sheila.
much
Dando um exemplo
more
rápido, né, do
easily.
produto acabado, e até ajudando, né, nessa
This is
organização
a
do
quick
que vai no
example of a
CQI,
finished product
CQI,
here.
VSJ e no módulo 3. Então, assim, para o produto
And
acabado, no CQI, para a description,
so for the
você
finished
apresentaria
product,
a forma farmacêutica, a composição, as características-chave.
The description will present the formula
a parte de, né, todo o racional do desenvolvimento, da formulação e as justificativas.
And the method for development of the formulation, the justification, and module 3,
de suporte.
you will present the additional data.
No caso do Core Quality Information, você
For manufacturing,
a descrição do processo, os controles de processos, os
information quality, we have process quality, we have controls, critical parameters.
Resumo da avaliação e do desenvolvimento do processo. E no módulo 3, você apresentaria
first J, you will
de avaliação,
process development and evaluation data. In module 3, you will present this data.
Reiterando, né? A ideia é você não ter
and other information.
Então, as informações são mais complementares.
And the idea is to avoid redundancy in information.
Você apresentará as especificações.
In the control CQI part, you will present the specifications. In SJ, you will present an overview, analysis of the justification and the reasons. And module 3, you will be presenting a batch analysis and justification data. And in CQI, in storage, you will include a description, storage conditions. In CJ, you will present the summary of stability studies, justification of proposed container materials and closure systems. And in module 3, you will be presenting in terms of storage the data supporting the conditions and the outcomes in terms of stability for the containers. So I believe this is a great slide because it allows us to see the ESJ as the rationale, the justifications for all the things that were selected and approved. And finally, module 3 will be used for additional data, such as other reports and information that supports the other data. So no more redundancies. Another thing that is very important, there have been many changes. A relevant point
essas seções não vão existir mais
R1, we have 3.2R and 3.3R, which will no longer be included because all the information that is local or regional will be presented as addendums or addenda. And so we have a general overview or general information for all the countries and all the authorities, but of course we want to zero in.
Mas a gente sabe que tem especificidades regionais, regulamentos regionais que acabam levando, né, a você ter conteúdo.
And there are things that are submitted in a global context, but are some regional contexts that lead us to define specific contents for specific regions. So despite the fact that we recognize that these would be ideal in these cases, whenever there's country-specific information, it would be presented through addenda. So, for instance, the dossiers will be provided under section 3.2 as addendums, and in section 3, whenever it is necessary, from regional regulations, because it's related to the manufacturing process. So it says I should contain the information on CJ on the packaging, and then other additional information. But as this is not required by all the authorities, you might have something specific for this information. I've tried to talk about the comparisons, and I'm close to finishing my presentation. A few more minutes just, and here we can clearly see what we recently explained about the comparison between R1 and R2 formats. In R1, we had module 2, which was much of the information was cut and paste from the from M3Q. So here we can see that despite the fact that we have module 2, which is a quality summary, many authorities in their analysis used module 3. So there were very few exceptions, but in general, the basis for regulatory action was module 3. So now in R2, we will have a module 2 where we will have much stronger and secure information about the control strategies and the other information, including lifecycle management tools that are under module 3. And it's not a duplicate, but rather a reference, because module 3 already has a more flexible modular structure. And we also have a guideline with the ISO standards, and as we have explained, this is a first stage for structured submission and some next steps for us to standardize all this.
Que o módulo 2 ele seja realmente a base, facilite a avaliação regulatória, né, por essas divisões, né? Então você ter a condição aprovada de forma mais fácil para ser analisada e também para o pós-registro. E claro, né,
suportado. And this current versus future framework is to make everything a bit more simpler.
Próximo slide.
And these are basically the summaries of Module 2 and Module 3. Now, this table compares a bit R1 with R2 in terms of format, content focus, risk-based principles, and data redundancy. In R2, the format would be a modular approach organized into consistent and reusable components to support digitalization. It's a bit more organized, or rather organized in a more consistent way to understand components better. So this is to adjust better to the digital era as well. In relation to content focus, there's a clearer separation of core information versus supportive content. And in relation to R1, there's now a clear separation, because in the R1 there was not a clear distinction between core and supportive information. Now, in relation to risk-based principles, in R2 there's an explicit integration of QRM throughout the dossier. And so this QRM is included in Module 2. It, as we said, would need a rationale between risk and scientific basis. And in relation to R1, there's quite repetitive information. It's literally a copy and paste. Now in R2, this duplication is quite minimized by this modular structure and this more structural module. Now it enables referencing whenever needed. That is how we have reduced data redundancy. This table is a continuation of comparison between R1 and R2 in terms of terminology and definitions. So as we mentioned, we've updated terminology aligned with IDMP. For example, transformation is a topic that is included in ISO, so we've used this basically so that we're all speaking the same language. We know that a problem is ambiguity and regional variation in interpretation because there are terms that are basically used by the different authorities. And well, we are going to align more with ISOs to have this more aligned language. So we've advanced in this realm. In addition to submission and assessment efficiency, these structured elements promote efficient data entry in R2, as well as reuse and improved navigation and a faster retrieval of critical information for assessment. As we mentioned before, the objective is for the CQI, the core quality information, to be really clear, for you to know basically the company entering in which section. Now, in terms of life cycle considerations, in R2, this enables science and risk-based life cycle management, as well as the ICH Q12 tools, as we mentioned. In relation to implementation and flexibility, this new review promotes flexibility and innovation due to the modular structure, and it is also aligned with modern regulatory and scientific practices. And in relation to digital compatibility, this review 2 and the CQI and the ICH Module 3, well, we know that these, or we rather understand that this R2 is now designed to be compatible with ECTD version 4.0, and it will enable automation and structured data formats, which can also translated into more efficiency in assessment. Now, these are some next steps or the work plan for ICH M4QR2. Other country members of the ICH, not only Brazil, are also carrying out these type of webinars and workshops to further explain the structure of this R2. So, as we are in the regional consultation season, as soon as we finish this stage, we will assess, review and resolve public comments until we reach this step 3, which is basically the sign off, and then we would continue to step 4, which is adoption of a final guideline. Right. I am about to finish so that we can go to a Q&A, but it's very important to highlight that what we perceive is going to be a great change from R1 to R2. We know that it's necessary global coordination between authorities to avoid the industry from preparing a dossier in 2 different formats, in the former format and the new format, and for you to avoid submitting, for example, an entry into a country that does not accept the new version. So we want to foster this global coordination. It will be absolutely important. Another important to highlight is the transition period. We know that considering all these different adjustments, we need, both from the authority standpoint as well as the ECTD, well, they all need to make adjustments to be able to accept this new format or this new revision. So this transition period is important to ensure sufficient time post-step 4 for adapting systems, processes, and vendor-supported tools without disrupting regulatory operations. And we also know that this needs to be a balanced approach. From the EWG perspective, it's important for authorities to really advance to adopt the ECTD and apply 4.0.
Fazendo parênteses, a Anvisa pretende já adquirir o ECTD na versão 4.0.
The ideal is for, of course, countries to already implement ECTD 4.0. However, there is a difference in classification in different authorities. So implementation of ECTD 4.0 is, if you will, the ideal. And despite this being in the scope of the ICH, because the implementation of ECTD 4.0 is not mandatory, it is not within the mandatory data requirements. We know that it is quite important for you to count on this format, the ECTD 4.0 in this later version that would allow, well, all the efficiency and all the advances and advantages that we presented in the R2. So it's quite clear that this is a path, a challenging path to fully implement this new version, but we understand that this is the uphill stage, and it is the path we need to undergo towards greater efficiency and patient access and patient benefits. So from the dossier standpoint, this is the first stage. So as soon as we can reach a more efficient assessment, both in the approval and post-approval phase, at the end of the day, the beneficiaries will be, well, the population, the patients. And this last slide, well, we changed it, but this is basically the information on the regional consultation in Brazil, ICH, and for QR2. These are the links for the official announcement of the Anvisa new release and the consultation link. The deadline for comments is September 5th. We requested already comments, and we are in the process of perhaps extending this deadline, because in the consultation stage, we understood that making other documents available as well as the guideline will be quite helpful, and it will actually really help assess the contribution. So today's objective and the group of the EWG is working in a mapping, a much more detailed mapping of R2. And so all R1 information will be in the R2 because, as we already mentioned, the structure is a bit different. However, we consider that R2 has a more comprehensive structure. And so the idea is to also show this comparison. Where would the information previously found in R1 would be found now in R2? And we will also showcase a model dossier, and we want to include a simple product which is based, well, you can access to this model dossier through the platform, a web page platform. And so you would better understand, for example, what would be part of the CQI, of the DSJ, because perhaps just explaining it, it's not so simple to understand. So that is why we've requested an extension of 45 days. Now, the expectation is for these documents to be approved by the EWG in the month of September. So if they are to be approved by EWG, they would be available in the ICH webpage. And so let's go to the next slide. Here we can find useful links. And we've included the ICH public consultations webpage. And that is where you will find these documents are available. So as I mentioned, there are two documents that we want to make available. One is the R2 draft guideline and the R2 concept paper, which, as I said, is just a synthetic product sample to basically show how these two reviews could be compared. So that is the end of the presentation of today. As I said before, we will also share some additional slides that you can consult, and I hope that this presentation has clarified a bit objectives and overall understanding to use this guideline. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll open up the space for a Q&A. Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Sheila, for an excellent presentation. So now we will continue to a panel discussion, and we'll have Ellen, Sheila, and Raphael. In this panel discussion, we will approach different aspects in terms of strategies of implementation, necessary training, as well as opportunities for further harmonization. And I would like to introduce the panelists. Ellen Nogueira, she is the topic lead of Anvisa for the M4Q. Sheila from AstraZeneca, we have already introduced. Thank you for your presentation. And is General Manager for Medicines Registration of Anvisa. Rafael also worked with MSC Anvisa, and previous to this, with analytical approval in the pharmaceutical industry as well. So I want to welcome all, and I will start with the first question for Rafael and for Ellen. So this entails quite a robust implementation plan. What have been the characteristics of advancing the assessment, registry assessment, and review process of a dossier?
Boa tarde, pessoal. Bom dia. Eu vou começar e aí a Ellen.
Good afternoon, good morning. I will start. And Ellen, perhaps you can complement if you want my answers. So, as I've been already introduced by my colleague, I think this entails quite a relevant paradigm shift that is quite significant, as we can see Module 2 and Module 3 were explained. So Module 2 currently has a variation on terms of how authorities analyze it.
O analisando primeiro até simplesmente o ignorando, né? Então,
so agencies or authorities first analyze it, or they can decide to ignore it. And this, of course, can create different ways in which assessment is carried out by the authorities, and also by how these agencies or authorities require documentations from companies, for example. And Visa, in the case of Brazil, focuses much more on Module 3, and so requirements tend to be much more specific driven and much more tailored to the complexity of the process. Meanwhile, in relation to Module 2, if an authority would be much more focused on this, well, requirements would be a bit more general. So this shift, as my colleagues mentioned, is perhaps redirecting that analysis. In Module 2, for example, it would no longer be a general summary, and it would shift to be a much more specific set of requirements. And in Module 3, perhaps I wouldn't mention backing data, but rather this would require additional documents to be consulted. And that would make perhaps authorities much more uniformed, if you will. And that would also have to do with more joint assessment, because, for example, this CQI, the core quality information segment or element, would facilitate more basic information about the product. And today this is quite difficult because those that are familiar with
uma relação muito forte com o CQI, aqui, embora não seja a
ICH12,
mesma
well,
coisa,
this,
né, nem todo
they
o
already
produto de
understand
Q12, desenvolvido de
CQI.
acordo com Q12 vai fazer parte aqui do escopo do CTD, mas ele guarda uma
And for
relação muito
example,
grande. Então, ele é
a
uma
product that
ferramenta muito
has already
interessante
been
para
developed
compliance. Então, eu
with the
diria
objective to
que o
comply
tal
with
como está sendo
this previous
proposto,
structure,
ele pretende
well,
tornar a análise das agências mais
I'd say
uniforme,
that this is a very
mais
important tool for
objetiva
Reliance because it
e
also
também
tries
facilitar
to
work
make
sharing,
authorities
facilitar
related
design, facilitar a
purposes and
realização.
information much more aligned, much more consistent, and it would facilitate harmonization.
Ellen, você gostaria de complementar com alguma informação?
Great. Thank you, Raphael. Would you like to complement?
Então, tá bem.
Acho que já cobriu muitos pontos.
Obrigada. Então, movendo agora, eu vou fazer uma
No, I
pergunta
think my
para
colleague
Sheila.
mentioned everything in a nutshell. So I'll ask the following question to Sheila. Now,
que você enxerga em relação a esse guia para a América
in relation
Latina?
to the sector, what are the potential opportunities that you deem in the usage of this guideline for Latin America? Well, I think that this revision or review really brings forth a change, a shift, also in new terminology. And I mean, this will take time. It took the group 4 years to reach this proposal. So now we expect the community and basically everyone to also adapted, integrated, and basically adapt to these great changes in the format.
So thinking about Latin America, but I think that this is the path to the future. And so we could continue to use that. But although it was not designed for more modern product categories, companies somehow accommodate that data. But it brings within the idea for the future how to treat the data in a structured manner using artificial intelligence and from then on. So the opportunity for Latin America and the world is how to think about this format that will not necessarily have a shorter life cycle, but that should be sustainable to face what is coming. We know that in Latin America there are regulator agencies that are not members of ICH. So what are we going to do with R2 about it for those countries that are not ICH members? So I invite you, and we ask the regulators to come closer to the proposal of the R2, even if they are not ICH members, but try to understand how it's being thought out, how it's being developed, so that authorities can also accept R2 model as the future, at least starting to assess what type of actions they can implement internally so that similar models to R2 can be used by them. And I believe that was very clear during that session. And the fact is that the future is already here. How are we going to get this future to occur, to take place within a CTD? So it's not something that is unnecessary. It is something that is much needed. So the discussion is there for everyone to understand how to use the model. Thank you, Sheila. And I believe that is a barrier that needs to be torn down and needs to be overcome in Latin America. And the fact that there are some countries that are not ICH members and don't have a CTD form and want to achieve harmonization. So there's an opportunity for implementation and acceptance of this new format that is incoming. So now, transferring the question to Anvisa, Rafael, Liliana, reflecting on the opportunities for harmonization with the purpose of achieving a single portfolio for this market, Anvisa plans to review its regulatory guidelines, seeking alignment with international guidelines. And there's a question that is also here that was made during the presentation, whether you would need some other specific documents with specific statements.
Ellen, se você quiser começar, já que eu comecei na outra.
Então eu começo. Assim, primeiro,
you want to begin?
A gente, acho que é importante, né? A gente,
first of all, I believe that
a gente está falando agora, né, da etapa do
it is first important to clarify the following. We're talking about the regional consultation stage for the guidelines, but so the other thing will be discussed in a later stage. And at that point, it's important to receive the contributions that are required. And in terms of the internalization of this, this will be done, but at a later stage. And we don't necessarily need to define all the tactics because it will all be contained in the model. But the change of these requirements is something that we must also discuss. Because just as we have some regional level requirements in Brazil, these kind of requirements occur elsewhere too. So we hope to find a pathway of convergence, because we know that all authorities have their specific approaches. And this is not the final destination that we have. We're working to facilitate an exchange, and the idea is that we can all work together in this convergence. We can all win from this, and there are also other initiatives for joint analysis and shared analysis, which are all facilitators for us to better work. And I wanted to say that we wanted to work together, but we know that we're not currently working to implement this in Anvisa, but we understand that down the road that will be necessary. And this is something that we've heard from many authorities, and we could even start analyzing Module 2 under the CTD format. But there are some people who complain about Module 2 having inconsistent information, that adds no value for analysis. But well, I mean, that is how it goes. We understand that everything seeks to facilitate quality understanding. Rafael, can you complement that? Well, I just wanted to add that some general insights. We want to remove country-specific requirements, and some of them were not up for discussion, such as some clinical events for the Brazilian population would be events that are specific, related to what we understand is significant for the Brazilian population. There are some specific examples, such as registration forms and corporate technical assessments could be replaced by some CTD tools, and they could also be replaced by R2 tools. But it's important to make very specific remarks for M4Q. The implementation of this guide is also very important that it be as uniform as possible for all countries at same time points. So maybe the ICH guides will not have that problem. Some agencies will implement it earlier on, or some others will later on. But we're talking about the updates of those documents, and I believe that it's not good for the agency to do such a quick implementation, because it will have a format of documentation that is not required by many of the agencies, or they should not do it too late down the road, because there's an implementation deadline in some cases, and I believe that that's something that's important to keep in mind, and to discuss the implementation with the agencies so that it is, to the extent possible, aligned in its state of implementation, because an agency that is an early implementer could be considered a country-specific requirement, and a very late implementer could also end up being a country-specific requirement. So I believe that is very important to make a joint implementation of this. Thank you, Rafael, and thank you, Ellen. And this question is for Ellen and Rafael also. For the implementation of the updated guide and for the establishment of awards or prizes for the implementation of this, could you give us some plans for the implementation of this CTD by Anvisa? And also, what are the challenges for national industries for the implementation of this guideline? And I believe that there's a link that has the answer for this first question. I believe that there's this CTD Guide 24 is available. I can start. I can talk about the ICT and about the Guideline 24. About ICTD, which is still in its contracting stage. It has started its contracting process, and it's now in the bid or offer assessment stage. We have received some proposals, and we have a deadline that is until October 2025 to conclude the proposal review and decide who has been awarded the tender. So we first have a conversation with the tender winner to check the module 1 of ICTD against the country-specific module, and so we expect it to be customized, and we expect for the proposal received in an ICT document in 2026 can be used with the CTD form, and we hope that will be ready for the second semester 2026, because we will have a term where we will be needing to make some tests, so that will be for second semester 2026. And Visa has opted for this 4.0 version, and I believe that this term is for the 4.0 version of CTD, which has a considerable advantage in better managing the metadata. So it would be easier to use that version to include some AI tools or analysis tools. And with the Anvisa guide,
nos próximos meses, mas a mudança do guia
we
para
might
a adequação ao
make
ao
some
nível
very
4
specific
e
changes
2
in the
só
coming
seria
months,
feita depois do step
but
4 do
the
JK, né? Hoje ele está em consulta pública,
guideline
então a gente
change for
ainda
the
nem sabe se esse é
ER2
o texto final
would
dele.
only
Vamos esperar o texto final.
be
E
made,
aí a
and
Anvisa
it
vai
is
discutir uma
currently
mudança
in
que é
public consultation. That is
basicamente
not the
o que eu
final
comentei
text. We
anterior.
will wait for the final text, and
Pretendemos
Anvisa will be
sentar
discussing
com
that
as
change, as I
agências
mentioned in the
GH e
previous
talvez
comment.
algumas outras agências para tentar um
We
prazo de
hope
implementação mais
to
harmonizado,
talk
que
to
não
some other
aconteça de uma
ICH
implementação
agencies
muito
to
antes e uma muito
seek a
depois.
better
Hoje,
harmonized
para revisão do guia 4
implementation
se
term
ocorrer,
so that
ela vai ser
no
pontual, só
agencies
no
are
sentido
too
de
far ahead
talvez ajustar algo
and others are
nas
too far
garantias, né,
behind.
nos nossos relatórios anuais, ou uma coisa bem específica,
In
mas a revisão do guia para
in terms of making some
dessa
very
versão
specific
do R8 e
adjustments
4G,
based on the
ela só
revision of the
ocorreria depois do
guidelines
Step 4 e
for
depois
the adoption of this R2
discussão com as
version.
agências de
It would
seguro
only
que vão
happen
para sua
after that
implementação.
term and after
É
a
isso, Ellen, se você
discussion
quiser complementar ou adicionar
has
alguma coisa.
taken place with the agencies.
Ótimo. Obrigada, Rafael.
So, do you want to complement, Ellie?
Sim.
Raphael, do you view any challenges for
Juliana,
national industries, ICTD?
brasileiras, elas têm se adaptado bem ao
Brazilian
ciclo
industries
como é hoje, né? Houve, por
have
exemplo,
well
transição em
adapted
que
to a
algumas visas,
CDD as it is
alguns
today. There
conceitos
was
ficaram
a
pouco mais
period
claros,
of
né? Inclusive, a gente até percebeu
transition and
que
some changes, some
alguns
concepts may
entendimentos sobre o CTD
not have been very
não
clear.
são
In
harmonizados
fact, we
entre as
might have
indústrias multinacionais mesmo, né? Por
perceived
exemplo, de solução, relatório de desenvolvimento de
that
solução.
CTD
Algumas
is not
indústrias trabalham em
harmonized in terms
P2,
of the
outras
national
colocam em P5,
industries,
não tem
because for
harmonização em alguns
some
detalhes, não tem
companies are
harmonização
IP2, other companies
junto
are
com a indústria de
IP5, so there's
software
no
houve diferença,
harmonization in
né?
some
Tivemos
of the areas.
algumas discrepâncias
And
pequenas, mas
we had some
não
discrepancies, some
evoluiu
small
um grande problema no CTD rumo ao
divergences,
R8.
but there was
Por isso,
no
a gente espera
serious or
a
bad
mesma
issue
dificuldade, talvez eu
with
não usasse essa
CTD,
palavra, né, mas o
ICTD,
mesmo
nor
nível de
not neither with
equação
R1 nor with
que as indústrias
R2, and we
multinacionais,
expect a
porque é uma
similar
mudança grande de
period
paradigma, sim, mas
of
a ordem
adaptation for the
mudaria
national or
completamente,
multinational
conceitos como
industries,
CPY, DSG, que não
because
existem hoje, passariam a existir, então é uma dificuldade
there
grande,
would
mas
be
eu acredito
an
que não
important
seria
change of
muito diferente de
this
uma indústria multinacional. Talvez até um pouco mais fácil, porque a
concepts, and I
indústria
believe that this would
multinacional
be
ela vai
not
precisar
much
lidar
different
com
from a
várias
multinational
agências, e
industry. For
aí,
Anvisa, it
no
might be
período
a
de
little bit easier
implementação,
because it
isso
needs to deal
as
with
agências vão ter
several
entendimentos diferentes,
agencies in
enquanto uma
the
indústria
implementation
brasileira
period,
só
and
brasileira,
there are many
ela só
agencies
precisa
that
lidar
have
com a
different
Anvisa, né? Então, talvez até seja um pouco
timetables.
mais fácil, mas não vai ser fácil, vai ser assim, é uma
So
mudança
with
que
Anvisa,
precisa
it's a
muito
little bit
grande, que
easier.
vai requerer
It
desafios
is
fortes
quite
da empresa.
a significant
Eu acredito
paradigm
que é uma
shift,
questão de tempo.
and it is a considerable challenge. But I believe that this is just a matter of time. Thank you. Any other question? I believe that's an opportunity to facilitate exports if it is something that the national industry wants to do,
Com certeza.
and in alignment
Exportação
with
para a
international
Rússia, para
guidelines.
países
And yes, in fact,
desenvolvimento,
that's how it
GH,
goes.
outros
Is
países, seria facilitar,
export
principalmente
for
porque a
non-ICH
seção
member
CQI, né, a Core
agencies
Quality Information, como eu já mencionei, ela pode facilitar bastante o reliance, né? Então, não só
and
o fato da
CQI
Anvisa
could
praticar
facilitate
uma metodologia de
reliance
análise a partir de
not
outra agência,
only
mas
because
possivelmente porque as
Anvisa
agências
can
praticarem
conduct this
metodologias também a
assessment
partir da
from
decisão da
another agency,
Anvisa,
but it's possible for agencies to
facilitação do reliance,
do
ela
this
também
following
pode,
Anvisa
no futuro,
and Visa's
auxiliar
acceptance,
nessa exportação.
and a reliance could be helpful for exports later on.
outros elementos ou aspectos em relação às principais vantagens que
Would you
esse guia
like
revisado traz e barreiras que precisam ser
to
ultrapassadas?
talk about some other aspects in relation to the
Obrigada, Juliana.
main advantages? There are barriers
Acho
that
que
need to
eu
be
vou, o que eu vou falar
overcome.
aqui é o que a
Thank
gente já
you,
apresentou ao longo da
Juliana.
apresentação, com relação a benefícios
What
e
I
desafios,
will
e até a gente
refer
acho que já
to is
comentou um
something that
pouquinho
we have
aqui
already
nesse painel, mas eu acho
discussed
que
during our
é
presentation in relation
importante
to
a gente
benefits and challenges.
reforçar e destacar pontos que a gente
I believe
entende
that
que
it's
valem
important
a
to
pena
reinforce and
o
to
desafio,
highlight
né? Eu acho que de
some
fato vai ser uma curva
points
de
that I
aprendizado
believe are
para toda a
worth
indústria, né?
checking
E
out
todos os
about the challenges.
reguladores,
This
mas
will be
existe
a
sim,
learning
acho que
curve for
benefícios
all the
muito
industry
claros e
and also
esperados, né?
for
Esse foi
all the
o
regulators. But
como
I
bem
believe
poderia
that there
dito pela
are
Ellen, né? Acho que a
clear
gente
and expected
consegue hoje olhar com bastante
outcomes for
carinho,
this
assim,
project. As a
e não ter dúvidas de que se essa mudança
WG
ela tem
member
um impacto
and with
positivo,
Helen, I
né, no
believe that
futuro, óbvio, né?
we have
Talvez
no
esse texto
doubts
ainda
that
mude um
this
pouco, mas os conceitos que
change
estão sendo trazidos,
will
eles são
bring
importantes. Então, acho que
on a
eu
future
destacaria
change,
a questão dessa clareza dos
and
segmentos, né? Então,
I would
de novo, o M4Q, e não é
stress
sobre conteúdo, ele é sobre formato,
on
mas tinha um gap entre o
the
M4Q e os
issue
guias de
that
qualidade que foram surgindo, né? Então, hoje o
M4Q
M4Q ele está replicando o que já
in
foi
the
visto em outros guias de qualidade, mas talvez
quality
estando ali dentro
guidelines,
do escopo,
the
dentro do
M4Q is
item e da
replicating what
sessão
we've seen in
esperada,
other
eu acho
quality
que vai
guidelines, but
ajudar que as empresas tenham mais clareza do que está sendo esperado
in
pelas
terms of
autoridades e,
what is
consequentemente,
expected,
construam dossiês que estejam mais alinhados às
and the
expectativas,
expected
né? E
outcomes,
daí
we
vem a otimização, né?
expect
Você reduz exigência,
this
você
to bring
facilita a
greater
análise.
clarity
Um
for the
outro
companies
conceito
to be able
importante
to
que também
build
não é uma M4Q que
a
está trazendo,
portfolio
mas eu
much
acho que
more
talvez
easily
ele está
and to
reforçando, que é a questão
facilitate
da
and
análise baseada em
expedite
risco e
analysis.
ciência, né? Então, assim, são
And
conceitos
I
que já
believe
estão
that
super
this is
vigentes,
reinforcing
mas talvez o
risk and
M4Q
science-based
no texto que ele está
analysis.
propondo,
These
ele coloque
concepts
sempre
are
essa
fully
pitada
enforced,
de
but
provocação, né? Então,
in
tá, onde está a análise
the
de risco?
text that
Qual
is
que é o risco
proposed,
desse produto, né?
it's always talking about where the
Os
risk
os
assessment
overall
is,
control
what is
strategy,
the
overall
risk for this
development
product,
strategy, eles trazem muito essa visão
and
do risco, né? Então, o que
so
que é importante para esse produto,
it
né? Então,
is
acho que esse caminho da
bringing
análise de
all
risco e
this.
baseado em ciência é cada vez mais importante
What's
num
important for
portfólio
this
que a gente tem
product,
produtos cada vez mais
and
particulares,
it's
né?
increasingly
Com
important to
funções
have it be
específicas e tentem
science-based
ser
in a
adaptados ali
portfolio
né, para as
that has
características
the very
deles. Então, acho que
specific
esse é um ponto
products that
que
need
eu
to be
vejo bastante
adapted with their
valor e eu acho
characteristics.
que
So
talvez
this
vai
is a point
reforçar
that I
o uso
believe
dessa
is
abordagem
very valuable,
daqui para
and I
frente.
believe that
E eu acho
perhaps
que
we
uma
can
sessão
reinforce
também
this,
que foi
and it
surgindo,
will
acho que não foi
facilitate the
o
use
objetivo desde o
later
princípio, mas ela
on.
foi ganhando
And I
forma,
believe that's
que foi a
something
parte de
that came up, and it was not
pós-registro,
the
né, de
objective from the
lifecycle management,
start,
né?
but
Acho que
it's
no começo
gaining
foi muito
ground,
focado
is
no
the
registro, a gente até teve um
post-registration
pouco de
aspect.
resistência,
I
não, a gente
believe
está
that
falando de registro, né,
initially it was
no início
quite
das discussões, mas com o
registration
tempo foi
oriented.
se
We had some
discutindo
resistance or some
foi
pushback
se
at the beginning of the
concordando de
negotiations, but
que é tão
then
importante quanto o
we
registro como
talked about it and we
pós-registro,
reached an
que hoje
agreement
toma muito
about
tempo dos
the fact
reguladores, né?
that
Então, a gente tem volumes muito grandes de
post-registration
pós-registro.
stage
Então,
is as
ter uma
important
sessão
as
e ter, de certa
registration
forma, uma
stage.
padronização que a gente não tinha até agora dentro do ICH pode trazer um ganho, né? Então, a gente vai ter uma justificativa única, vai ter um racional único, vai ter templates
Today we have a
únicos. Então, com isso,
sole justification,
minimizando, né, a necessidade de
and I
preparar
think that
documentos
with
counter-específicos.
this
Então, acho
we
que
will
esses são
be
alguns
able
dos
to
benefícios,
minimize
né? Mas eu e a Elia aqui talvez
specific
sejamos,
document preparation. So I think that these are all
tenhamos
benefits
viés porque a gente né,
that
é
perhaps
apaixonada
Ellen
pelo
and
projeto, a
I
gente tem se dedicado muito
are a
a
bit
esse projeto.
biased
Mas com
because,
relação a
of course,
desafios,
we
eu acho que da mesma
absolutely
forma
love
que os
this project.
benefícios,
However, in
desafios
relation
estão
to
ali de certa forma
challenges, I would say that
conectados,
in the
então
same way
eu acho que existia uma grande expectativa
as
da indústria,
benefits
né? Eu vou falar do lado da indústria,
are established,
no
I think
início do
challenges
projeto, de que a gente chegasse num
are
dossiê
established, and I
único,
know that there's
né?
great
Mas com
expectation
o
of the industry
tempo, né, foi ficando muito
to reach
claro
a
que
unified one sole
o EWG,
portfolio
o M4Q,
with
R2
one sole
EWG não ia
item. And
conseguir
I think it's
ultrapassar as
quite
barreiras
clear
locais, né?
that
Então,
EWJ
justamente porque um guia
and
ICH não se
M4Q
sobrepõe as legislações
wouldn't
regionais. Então, esse é ponto que
only
vai ficar
include these
como
local barriers, because
mensagem
this, of
como uma
course,
devolutiva do grupo pro
is
ICH,
only
mas
in
de fato essa
relation to
barreira dela vai ter
local
que ser
authorities. And I think that
lidada,
that will be a
gerenciada
message
pelas próprias
for the
autoridades, com a
ICH.
maturidade
But these
do uso do
barriers must be
8.4/R2, como a Ellen
managed
comentou, né?
by
Eu acho que são conceitos
the
novos
authorities.
vindo e talvez o futuro, tendo módulos 2
As Ellen will mention,
robustos e
and I
muito
think that we
estruturados
will
dessa
have
forma,
new
talvez
concepts and hopefully with
deixe de fazer sentido a
more
gente falar em campo
robust
específico, porque
and
vai
structured
estar todo
module
mundo ali
2.
preparando dossiês baseados
Perhaps it
nas
wouldn't make
características do seu
sense to
produto,
talk
e com isso
about
é difícil
specific
ditar uma
products
regra
because
de novo,
everything
né?
will be
Talvez
based
ali vai
in the
sempre botar
characteristics of the product. And so we won't really
dossiês
need to have a specific
características de cada um dos
rule
produtos. Então, acho que esse é uma
for
oportunidade que ainda existe, né? Uma barreira,
these
mas que
characteristic
ainda é uma
portfolios.
oportunidade da gente chegar nesse dossiê
So
único em algum
I
momento,
think
né?
that
Porque a gente vê que isso vai trazer
this,
grande ganho,
this
né?
characteristic
Reliance, como a gente está
exists,
falando aqui
and the
nessa
objective,
mesa,
the ultimate objective is to reach this
discussão. Então, Reliance, work sharing,
one
tudo
sole
isso, né? Todas essas
portfolio, as
ferramentas, elas
we talked about
precisam
reliance
desses
and work
dossiês o mais padronizado
sharing.
possível
All
para que
these
elas sejam
different
eficientes, né?
tools
Elas tragam para
need
que elas tragam a agilidade que elas
standardized dossiers
buscam trazer. E eu acho que outro
so that we
desafio
can
que
be more
o Rafael
efficient.
colocou
I
muito
think
bem,
another
né? E
challenge
eu
that
fico feliz de que a
Rafael
Anvisa
also
esteja com esse olhar
clearly
com relação à
mentioned
implementação
is
simultânea,
that
né? Como a gente
Anvisa
trabalha lá na frente, quando a gente tiver já
also has a
pronto, o
vision
step 4
of
atingido, os vendors, né,
implementing
fazendo as adequações na ferramenta do ECPD, como a gente
simultaneously.
garante minimamente ter cronograma muito
And when
ali
we are
equiparado
able
entre as
to make all
autoridades,
these different
porque
changes, I
caso
think we
contrário,
can
realmente
ensure requirements of
né,
authorities. On the
burden, né,
contrary,
o
I think,
prejuízo de você ter que preparar dossiês
well,
em
the
2 formatos é
fact of
realmente
having to
preocupante.
prepare
Eu acho que
dossiers in
essa
two different formats is quite
um
concerning.
desafio
So I
que
think that this is an important
tá,
challenge
tá em foco dentro do
and
EWG.
is
Então,
definitely within the
tanto é que tá
scope
nos
of
slides do ICH,
EWG,
né? Então, a mensagem que o EWG
and it's
está
also within
desde
the
já
ICH
transmitindo
guidelines.
para a
So
alta
the
liderança do ICH. Eu acho que a gente
ICH is
talvez vai estar
also
fazendo a
seeking
lição de
this.
casa agora, para que no futuro
So I
a
think
gente não
this
se
is literally
depare com esse
homework
problema.
that we're doing now
Mas, de
so that
forma
in a
geral,
later
né, eu
stage we
ainda acho que os
wouldn't
benefícios
be faced with
superam
this
os
challenge. However, I
desafios.
do
Acho que
believe that
é uma
benefits
jornada, é uma curva de
overcome or
aprendizado
surpass
e
challenges,
que a
of
gente vai
course.
ter
It is a
que se
path to go,
desafiar e aprender
and we need
juntos. E
to
até nessa
learn
sessão, acho que eu
together.
vejo,
And
né,
this
essa
is
discussão
just the
conjunta
first
indústria
stage.
e
This is a
regulador,
first
ela é muito
joint
importante, porque no final do
conversation
dia
between the industry
são
and
os dois
regulators. And these
juntos
are
que
very
vão
important
fazer
because it
com
is
que
these two parties
essa mudança
together
ela realmente
that will
atinja o
make
sucesso que é
this
esperado.
shift really happen and be successful as
Com
expected.
certeza. E servindo os pacientes, né,
Absolutely.
que tanto necessitam
And
dos
well, the ultimate
produtos,
objective is to
medicamentos
serve
e
the patients,
vacinas, né,
those that need these
e
drugs and
visando,
services the
né, a
most.
missão de proteger e salvar
And that is
vidas,
the
né,
mission
com
to
produtos de
protect and
qualidade.
save lives with
Obrigada,
high
Sheila.
quality
E
services. Thank you,
Rafael e
Sheila.
Ellen, qual mensagem
Raphael
você gostaria de deixar para outras
and
agências
Ellen,
e
would you like to
representantes de
perhaps
outros países da
provide a
América
takeaway
Latina
message
acerca desse
for
dia?
other participants of other countries of Latin America?
Dessa vez, né? O que é que eu...
Deixar com você,
Would you
Rafael.
like to go ahead? I think you should go ahead.
Pouco do que eu já falei, né, relacionado à implementação,
All right,
eu
as I
acho
already
isso
mentioned
bastante
in the
importante, né?
part of the
Existe
implementation, I think that this
termo
is quite
que
important.
algumas literaturas,
There's a
algumas
topic found in
dessas entidades que fazem pesquisa de prazos
literature of
em
these
agências,
entities that
se referem, que
research,
é o
and
submission gap, né? O gap de
these
submissão.
refer
Não
to
sei como eu
this
traduziria isso, mas é
so
o
no
tempo
this term known as mission
para
gap.
ser submetido na primeira agência. Normalmente o FDA ou
And
uma agência
basically it's
europeia
the time in which
e
one
o
is
tempo nas
submitted to
em
a
outra
first
agência. Então,
authority,
o submission gap é grande fator
and
de
that period of
contribuição
time is different
para poder
to the time of
melhorar
other
ajudar
agencies or
os
authorities rather.
pacientes
And that, of course,
do
affects
Brasil e eu
patients,
diria que
at least in the case of
provavelmente
Brazil. And
dos
I would
países
even dare to say
latino-americanos.
that most
Eu não
probably in
conheço
other Latin
exatamente
American countries.
o
I
restante dos países
don't
latino-americanos,
know
mas
the
se eu
context
tivesse
of
que
other
chutar,
Latin
eu
American
diria que eles têm um
countries
submission
at
gap
depth,
parecido com o do
but I would
Brasil.
dare to
Ou
say
seja,
that they
as
have this
empresas
submission gap that
primeiro
is quite
submetem
similar to the
no FDA,
Brazilian
nos Estados
case.
Unidos, ou na Europa, ou enfim,
For
nos dois.
example, in the US or
E,
in Europe,
em geral,
it's quite
submetem no
different. And
Brasil e em outros países
the,
latino-americanos
for example, the
depois.
case of Brazil
Isso
or
é,
Latin
em
America,
parte,
this
estratégia da
submission gap
empresa,
happens at a
em
later stage.
parte,
On the one hand,
requisitos
that
dos
is
tratamentos
strategy of the company,
específicos.
and on the other hand, it's
O
because of
que
a
nós
specific
temos
regulatory
com a revisão do
requirements.
guia
Now,
CPD
with the review, we have suggested to reduce even more these period of or deadlines rather, to reduce these submission gaps. And this is quite important so that innovative products can reach patients faster, at least Latin American patients, and anyway, in any country where applicable. I would clarify that we have specific requirements, of course, as countries, and some requirements, for example, are specific to Brazilian patients. And for example, all information should be provided in Portuguese. That is not under discussion. However, we have worked a lot in trying to reduce any components that could contribute to increase the submission gap. And I would say that the implementation of this guideline is quite important to this aim, either to reduce the submission gap or perhaps to avoid increasing it. And if there's an increase by a multinational company, for example, and it could perhaps take longer to present registries of countries, perhaps, where the products have been submitted much later. That, of course, can affect the time it takes for these products or these patients to actually have access to these products in that country. It's important to clarify that the submission gap is not only a matter of the authorities. Sometimes it's even a matter of the companies. And of course, well, that leaves us with perhaps little to do, but Anvisa in Brazil has worked to try to split a co-responsibility in defining these submission gaps. And so I think that this is quite important to strengthen reliance and other measures that could perhaps, of course, benefit patients ultimately. Great. Rafael and Juliana, I'd like to just add the following. I think that, for example, sometimes there's issues with HR, and of course, as you mentioned, improving efficiency is something that I also deem as a significant benefit, because it is resources are allocated and we need to basically efficiently use them and see what are the measures that can lead us to having early victories or gains. And what we're proposing is exactly aimed at this end, or at this aim. And it's not only to, for example, anticipate these submissions, but also manage life cycles, to basically refer to a product and see all the backing documentation in the easiest way possible. And I think that this shift, of course, must undergo several stages. And I do understand that HR work is quite worthwhile to integrate, because, of course, we can have much more efficiencies working together with them. And, for example, analyzing or assessing certain documents that are part of Module 3, those documents that we wouldn't have to actually refer to, because that risk assessment is now in Module 2, well, I think that that is also benefiting the whole process. And as Sheila well mentioned, we're really trying to make this better. The tools are available, and I think perhaps we don't use, or perhaps we don't explore all possibilities. But I think the objective of this dissemination is also to make this difference much more clear. The difference between resources and demand. I just wanted to highlight this. Great. And I do think that efficiency gains are quite important. I think we're all interested in it. And before concluding, we have 5 minutes left before closing this webinar. I'd like to ask our panelists, Sheila, Rafael, Ellen, would you like to perhaps
Eu
give
rapidamente,
a
até para,
concluding
assim, primeiro
offer,
eu queria
concluding
agradecer, né, a
comment.
Sheila faz
I
parte do
want
grupo, uma
to
pessoa
thank
que tem
Shayla.
uma
She's
super
part of the
parceria, né,
group,
com a
and
Sheila, queria
we
agradecer
really
nossa
were able
faculdade.
to work
E assim,
quite well
é o que a
together, and I
gente
wanted
colocou,
to
né, acho
thank
que a
you for
gente está
this
no momento de
opportunity.
consulta
And it's as
regional, então
we've
acho que é
already
importante
stated, we are now in the
as
regional
empresas
consultation
olharem a
period of time,
organização, verificarem se
and
elas,
we are
né, o que elas acham
basically
dessa nova organização e principalmente, né,
wanting to
apresentem as contribuições, né?
read
Esse é o momento
comments
realmente da gente
and see
receber
what you think
as
of this new
contribuições,
organization,
principalmente de
this new
empresas
structure.
que não estão, né, não
And
fazem
especially if
parte
there
de
are
outras
companies that are not
associações
part
de
or perhaps are
fora, né, de
part of
empresas
other
multinacionais. Então,
associations.
essa é a oportunidade, né, de
This
apresentar essas
is, I think, the
contribuições,
opportunity to
né? Como a
also
gente
disseminate these
falou, a ideia
contributions. And
não é
as we already
aumentar o
mentioned,
requisito, e
the
sim,
objective is not
né,
to
trabalhar na
increase
questão
requirements, but
conteúdo.
rather
Então,
work on this
né, a
matter
gente
of
espera que
content.
realmente
So we
isso
really
tenha ficado
expect
claro. E
that
assim,
this has been clear
né,
in this
conforme
session.
consta no edital, se for possível, que as contribuições sejam feitas em
And
inglês, né, porque elas vão
if
ser,
possible, comments should be
a
made in
gente vai
English
encaminhar para o
because
EWG,
we
né,
will
as contribuições
channel
referentes à
these to
guia,
the
e a gente espera
EWG.
que
And so we
realmente,
really
né,
hope
né, eles aproveitem essa oportunidade
that
mesmo,
people
de
seize this
avaliarem o
opportunity
guia, darem as
of
contribuições que elas vão ser
assessing and
levadas, né,
contributing
para
your comments and
o nosso
observations
grupo de trabalho.
to be able to also enrich our work. Thank you, Ellen.
Assim, então, acho que a gente já pode caminhar para o nosso
So,
encerramento. Então, como
having said this,
discutido
we
e
can formally
apresentado aqui
conclude. And
neste
so, as
webinar,
discussed
esse novo
in
guia
this
tem
webinar, this
como
new guideline
o objetivo trazer benefícios
seeks
para a elaboração
to
dos
bring
dossiês a
benefits
serem
for the
submetidos e apoio para o pós-registro
dossiers
durante o
and
período do ciclo de vida do
submission of the
produto,
same,
para as autoridades
and a
sanitárias.
better
O
life
guia
cycle
também
management
tem
for
como objetivo
health
trazer melhorias
authorities.
para a
And the guideline
revisão e
also seeks
avaliação mais
to
eficiente,
improve and
facilitando a
enhance
avaliação baseada em
more
risco
efficient
e na
assessment, for
ciência, e
example,
também suporte ao
including
uso do
risk and
Reliance
scientific
e do work
basis, as well
sharing.
as the risk and use of
Por outro
reliance and work
lado, a gente
sharing.
aprendeu
On
aqui
the other
grandes
hand,
barreiras
we
precisam ser
have talked
removidas
about
para a
the
implementação do
challenges that need to be
guia
overcome
nos
and barriers that need
sistemas,
to be
implementação
removed
do
to be able to
ICD,
use the
a
guideline
harmonização
within the systems.
global,
Also,
dos guias,
the
para
global
evitar
harmonization of
múltiplas
the
versões
guidelines
de mesmo
to
dossiê
avoid
ou
multiple
casos em que os
versions of
países
a
onde
same
essa
dossier
nova
or double
estrutura ainda
registration
não
in
estará
which
adotada.
countries where
E
perhaps this
com base
structure
no
is not
que
yet adopted. And in
apresentado, né, e
relation
discutido
to
hoje, eu
what has
também,
also
assim
been
como a
presented
Ellen mencionou,
and
eu
discussed
chamo a
today, as
todos para que
Ellen mentioned, I
contribuam
would
para
like
essa
to
consulta
call you and
pública.
invite you all to be part and
O
engage
link, né, está aqui
in
disponível
this public
na
consultation. The
apresentação,
link is
inclusive, que foi
available in
compartilhada
the
pela
presentation
Ellen
that has
durante o
already
webinar
been
de
shared
hoje.
by
E aqui
Ellen
eu gostaria
in
de
today's
agradecer
webinar.
muito a
And we
Sheila,
would
a
like to
Ellen
thank
pelas
Shayla,
apresentações, por
Ellen
todo o
for your
trabalho,
presentations
a
and for
participação
all
do
your hard work,
painel, e
and also the
Rafael também
participation of
por
the
sua
panel. And
participação nesse
of course,
painel e
we'd also like to
esclarecimento,
thank
né,
Raphael
de
for your
dúvidas.
participation in
E
the
em
panel
nome dos
and answering questions.
organizadores,
And on
também
behalf
a
of the
EMEI,
organizers
Pharma,
of
a
the
MIF,
of
KM e da
Pharma
Pharma, eu gostaria
PNA
de agradecer pela
and all,
participação
I
de
would like
todos.
to also
E a
thank you
gente se
for your
vê na semana
participation,
que vem, no
and
dia
I hope
26
to
de
see you
agosto,
soon
na
on
sessão
the
específica
26th
de
of August.
boas-práticas
This will be a
clínicas
specific
do
session on
guia
best clinical
SUS. Tá
practices.
bom? Muito obrigada. Tenham uma
Thank
boa
you,
tarde.
and have a good afternoon.